Hi all, Chris Oliver here. I wanted to finish my desert story. Um, at the end of the last video I was saying how my housemate had taken me out there. Um, we pulled over on the side of the road, and once he realized, or once I told him that I was just going to march into the desert, um, it was very emotional for him. We are, as I mentioned, very close, um, and he didn't want to see me march off to my death. That was the short of it, but I wasn't having any of it. I was terrified for my life. I feared what I felt was my inevitable fate. And so I went to put on the hat that I brought with me, and I couldn't find it in the truck, even though it was definitely in the truck when I got there, or when I got in. So my housemate gave me his ball cap, and he gave me the 12-ounce bottle of water he'd been drinking on. And I also took with me a small rag, kind of like this, but smaller. And oh, and a headless Siddhartha statue that it was headless because my most favorite cat that I've ever had knocked it off a shelf and broken its head off, and I just kind of felt that was a better representation of the concept of the Buddha, just the headlessness of it. I also had a blanket with me, the same blanket I was hiding under in the back of the truck, and my backpack, this same backpack right here. Um, but I left those in the truck because I'm marching into the desert. What the crap am I going to do with these things? Um, so me and the old man, we said our goodbyes. He pleaded for me not to go, and I just, like I said, told him I had to, and I marched off into the desert. I walked for maybe about 45 to 60 minutes. A lot of the stories have very approximate times, just because I was lost in the desert for about, I'd say about 22 to 24 hours, somewhere in there. And I should mention that my housemate, when he got home, called search and rescue. And I do remember seeing their helicopters that day, and I remember trying to wave at one, but I was so just exhausted by the time I saw them that I didn't really even have the energy to wave at them. But I'm getting ahead of myself. I marched out of the desert. I walked about 45 minutes to an hour, and I remember seeing some mountains in the distance, not in the far distance, but relatively close enough that I could theoretically walk to them. So I remember being headed towards those mountains. Uh, Local sports team is doing well. You're wondering what the cheering is. They really like my story. They're just far away. Um, yeah, so I was walking towards the mountains, and I remember I laid down before I got there, and I looked up to the sky, and I asked God to take my life to save my man from this evil that had infested us. We are spiritually and culturally infested. And, even though I was still hung up on aliens at the time, I knew just, I'd gotten a pretty good picture of the extent of how far it went. So I asked God to take my life to save my fellow man, which, it sounds, but I was alone in the desert. It's what I did. And I laid there and I waited, and you may be unsurprised to learn nothing happened. So I'm laying there, after making this plea, and I probably laid there for a good 20, 30 minutes more, and finally I'm like, all right, this is ridiculous. I have to get back to the highway. I have to do what I can. Just killing myself in the desert isn't going to accomplish anything. And so I got up, and I turned back around, what I thought was the direction that I came from, and I'm still mostly sure that I just got up and turned directly back around, but I feel I was intentionally lost there as part of my test. And Kat was still with me. Kat Darden, the medium I mentioned before, she was still in my head, but she was pretty quiet. She was pretty quiet the whole time I was in there. Most I could just hear her laughing at me for trying to call so many times when she was right there. So I turned around and I started marching back, and almost as soon as I started marching back, my pants just fell. I mean, I had on blue jeans with a belt even, and they were just suddenly at my ankles. I thought that's a good idea. They're heavy, they're hot. I should probably take them off and carry them. So I annoyingly took off my boots again because I was really badly dressed for this adventure. I took off my boots and I took off my jeans and I started just carrying them walking back towards the highway and drank all my water way too fast. And I remember the first time I took a piss, I remember thinking, maybe I should have saved that. Maybe I'm going to need that. But at that point, I was still sure that I was walking back towards the highway and I'd be like, I'll be back there in an hour. I'll be a little thirsty, but I'll be fine. That did not turn out to be the case. I ended up getting quite lost. Uh, I basically spent the day terribly thirsty, terribly hot, as you can imagine, and I had basically after a little while of walking, had stripped down to just my boots, so I was naked in the desert walking around, just so my body could breathe, and I would basically look for an area with some shade, uh, hobble there and lay down and try to cool off while I was there, and I started pissing into the bottle that I had and drinking my piss as much as I could. That lasted for most of the day, but by the end of the day, I had, just recycled the same fluid so many times that it was barely anything was coming out at that point. But I remember realizing that I was lost, and I asked Kat, was I going to survive? And I remember her saying to me, have faith and you will be fine. And then she was gone. And then she left my head. It was the last I ever heard of her. Um, it was a weird experience having her there. Just because, as I mentioned, I don't believe she was there to guide me, but maybe she found some sympathy for my situation in that point. I think she was very much like the girl I talked to, or the girl who found me on Reddit that I talked to via Skype that I mentioned last time. Uh, she was there to help trick me into some other role, or just to make me do something that kept me afraid. Um, and in retrospect, that's probably right. I mean, I'm sure if I had gone to that hippie hollow, I would have been bombarded with "Be afraid, be afraid." The man's looking for you. We are your friends. We are here to hide you. But again, it's just all demon deception, and they are tricksy little demons. That's all I'm saying there. So, I'm in the desert. Cat has left me, and it's still, you know, probably mid-afternoon, and I'm moving forward as much as I can. Moving forward as much as I can. I'm looking, for shade, and I'm looking for the highway, and it just kind of wandered around hopelessly lost. There really wasn't much to note. It was around this time in the story that I actually saw the search and rescue helicopter, but again, they didn't see me. I remember seeing some buzzards hovering above me as I was resting one time and thinking, well, that's a good sign. Because, you got to bust out the sarcasm in those situations. It'll help keep you sarcastic. And, but finally, I just kept hobbling and walking into shit from shade to shade, and I got close to the highway and I could see it, but I couldn't move anymore. And the sun had finally started going down, and I was probably, I'd say about 200 yards away from the highway by the time night came. But I just collapsed. I laid there naked in the desert, and that was, again, that was a long night of doubt, to steal a phrase. I had lost hope in a lot of ways. I couldn't sleep. I hadn't been able to sleep for about a week prior, just because there was so much energy coming into my head that, I'd lay down to sleep and my head just wouldn't. And, I never felt tired during it. I always felt mentally alert and physically rested. I would sometimes just lay in bed for a couple hours, kind of mostly out of habit. That's not true anymore. I get a good night's sleep these days, and I have for months now. But yeah, night came, and I remember trying to strangle myself with the belt that I'd been wearing, and I couldn't get it tight enough. I just couldn't get it tied up, but I did get it stuck on my neck, which was just insult to injury at that point. Uh, yeah, it got stuck, but I finally got it off myself. And at that point, I was so tired. I remember seeing a bush that I thought just maybe might support my weight that I could tie the belt to, but I didn't have the energy to even walk over or crawl over because I was basically reduced to rolling in the sand at that point. But the night was beautiful. It was just laying there in this perfect desert temperature, which felt so good after the long hot day. Naked in the sand, which isn't like dirt; it doesn't stick, so it's just a beautifully clean experience. Um, I saw a lot of UFOs that night. I'd never seen a UFO before in my life, but I remember very distinctly seeing a group of four that were flying in formation that kind of looked like giant B-52. No, not B-52s. The stealth bomber, the one with the weird jagged wings. Except they had these bright yellow lights kind of on the inside of the wings on the bottom, and I don't know if those were supposed to be a propulsion system or if they were just pretty lights for me to see. I saw, you know, 4 or 5 more traditional UFOs, the saucers, and they would be in my field of vision just momentarily and then accelerated, like near light speed, just zoom away instantly. And all that was a deception, but it was kind of a last attempt to keep me sold on the aliens. And the aliens did stick with me until after I got home. But I did finally manage to get some sleep that evening. I fell asleep at what felt like 3 or 4 a.m. It felt very, very late. And it was when I was waking up that I heard the voice of our infinite creator. And our infinite creator said to me, "You have a new name now." And I said, "What is my new name?" God said, "Your name is now Chris Oliver Times." And I said, "Yes, my Lord." And God said, "Now get up and go." And I woke up and I looked over at the highway, and I'd always been agnostic before, and I didn't fully understand what conversation I just had because I woke up immediately after it, but it was very real. It was the voice of God is pure and soundless. It's a pure vibration inside your head. Uh, and I could see God's face, and God looked like a fisherman. A fisherman without a fishing hat, mind you. Just a big white bushy beard. And I'm not an artist. I wish I were. I wish I were. But I got up, like I was told, and I started walking to the highway, and I was better off for energy, but still very sore from the previous day. So I, made it about 50 yards at a time, sometimes 50 feet at a time, and I would just fall and collapse forward and just have to lay there. There's no shade around there, so it was just trying to make as close of a beeline to the highway as I could. Finally got to the highway, had to cross over the first lane because I knew I wanted to go back to the other direction, to Palm Springs, and just laid at the side of the road because I could not stand up. And for the very first time in my life, I prayed. I just said, "Please, Lord, let them see that I need their help." And I laid there and I tried to stick my thumb up, but I could barely lift my arm. And finally, a trucker stopped, and a van full of prison security guards on their way to work also stopped. And they thought I was dead. They were all quite surprised whenever I sat up and turned around and kind of went, "Water, water." And they started asking me questions, and I was just flat out, "I will tell you everything, please, water. I've been lost in the desert." They were suspicious it was a trap, but if it was a trap, it'd be the worst trap ever. I'm gonna lay on the side of the road here until somebody stops, and then I'm gonna get whoever that is. Yeah, that's the worst crime ever committed. But no, I was sincerely in need of help. And initially, the trucker was gonna take me, but then the prison security guards decided they were gonna take me. And this beautiful moment when I first got into the back of their van and I sat down on their floor, kind of as much under an AC vent as I could. One of the guards in front of me stopped and turned and said, "Do you want some food?" And in his hand was an apple, and I was just like, there are no coincidences. for an apple to be the first thing offered to me was eye-opening in a lot of ways, reassuring in other ways. Um, but they were fantastic. They gave me like 2 bottles of water and the Gatorade and that apple and some sliced orange, and I was just it was a lifesaver. It's exactly what I needed. Fruit and water. Oh, I was so happy. Fruit and water. They took me about halfway. They dropped me off on Dillon Road, which was appropriate because that's my legal name, Dillon. Um, and I sat by the side of the road there, and I tried to hitchhike a little bit for a little while, but I didn't feel like anyone was going to pick me up, so I saw there was a Del Taco, so I went inside the Del Taco, and hoping to call my housemate and like, hey, do you have a phone I can use? And they're like, no, we're sorry, it's the manager's office, you can't come back here. And I'm like, it's fine. And I kind of tell them my story. I'm like, can I give you a number to call, and you can just tell them that I'm here, so please come pick me up. And they were cool. They said yes, but for the life of me, I could not remember the old man's phone number. Thank you, cell phones. I don't remember anyone's phone number anymore because I don't have to enter it. Um, and while I was sitting in this Del Taco waiting to, or trying to figure out what I was going to do next, a family had come in, a man, his wife, and 2 or 3 kids. And I asked the guy if I could, please use his phone for a minute, so I could see if maybe muscle memory could help me remember the number. And it did not. And I ended up giving him back his phone, just kind of giving up and giving it back and saying thanks. And as I was sitting there thinking to him, that same guy came up to me and he says, hey, here's $20, get some food. And I'm like, oh, thank you, that's very nice of you, but I'm actually going to use this $20, to go buy a ride from someone outside, because I didn't want to ask him because he's with his family, and that's, it's a bit much. Um, but a strange moment as I was walking out of that Del Taco, I turned and looked at the man and his wife, and I said, God bless, and kind of nodded. And when I did, his wife gasped, and I have no idea what she saw, but I would love to know what she saw. Uh, and she let out an audible gasp, and I almost stopped and asked, but I didn't. I walked out. Went to a gas station that was kind of across the street there, and offered one dude the $20 if he could give me a ride, and he said no, but he offered me his Black and Mild, and I happily took it, having of course finished my half pack of smokes while in the desert. And it was delicious, and I still enjoy Black and Miles today. True story. But the second guy I asked very thankfully took me home, and he initially was talking about how he wanted to drop me off near the city. I'm like, dude, please, I've had the longest day. I just need to get back to my house before I completely collapse. And I remember I was sick, thankfully not in his truck. I got the door open and kind of puked on the street once, and once again out the window. This kind of gross, thick, white, mucusy. It might have been pulp from the fruit, actually, now that I think about it. I might have just put too much water in my system too soon. Makes sense to me now, but I finally get home and I open the door, and my housemate is on his feet before I'm even in, because he sees my shadow walking up because I went around the back to where he was. And he grabs me and he starts crying about how happy he is to see me again, and how he, thought he'd lost me. And at that point, my bowels had started kind of loosening, and I could feel it. And I'm just like, Don, I love you, but you're screaming in my ear, and I have to go take a shit right now. And I did, and I'd had problems with blockage for years, but my body had started healing itself at that point, and just completely, not completely emptied my bowels, but it was quite a movement. Let's put it that way. Beethoven would have been proud. Uh, yeah, and that day was just surreal. I didn't fully understand what was going on. What I can only describe as heat stroke finally kicked in, because I'd managed to stay perfectly lucid out in the desert, just physically exhausted. But the heat stroke did kick in when I got back home. I probably spent 2 or 3 hours kind of talking to my wall about nothing, just because I was I was out of it. I mean, I was in a comfortable house with air conditioning at that point, but the day in the desert had finally hit me physically. So that was a strange day. I think I'm gonna stop here. I feel the story's been long enough right here. There's a good chunk to tell, I guess, in what's gonna be part 3, but I want to go ahead and stop because that feels like a logical stopping point. But we'll pick back up with the pooping, the post pooping episode, the PPE, if we will, in an unplanned part 3, which I will do sometime this week. So I love you. Be well.